strikes deep into your life, it will creep. It starts when you're always afraid. Step out of line, the man come and take you away. Think it's time we stop. Children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop, hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop, hey, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down. Stop, children, what's that sound? Everybody look what's going down.
You travel around that bus, and the one highlight of the day is a jump start. Nothing like it. Hey, we're so glad to be here. A couple of times we've had the privilege of being here in this church, and a bunch of times the privilege of being in this area. So we're really glad to be here, but honestly, we wish we didn't have to keep coming back to places in the United States to talk about the threat of Christian nationalism. We look forward to the day we can just come enjoy the good friends and the beautiful fall weather in West Michigan and not have to talk about the threat of Christian nationalism. But that is not today, because just like that old song from the 1960s still fits in 2024. Conversations about Christian nationalism in the United States are about as American as you can get. It turns out that since the founding of the country, and even years before the founding of the country, the people thinking about the United States were arguing about how Christian this country should be. Some of the colonies had Christian requirements. Some places, in order to be in leadership in some of the colonies, you had to be members of particular churches and profess a certain faith. There are some people who still want the United States to be like that. So they're not entirely crazy to say sometimes in the United States we've had a history of Christian nationalism being the way forward. But when we decided to become a United States of America, we formed a constitution, and that constitution had some amendments to it after it was written. And the First Amendment, the very first one, has a thing in it, which some of you are familiar with, called the Establishment Clause, saying that Congress shall pass no law that would establish or prohibit the existence or the practice of any religion. So they made a determination right away, very first time in the very start of the United States of America, as a constitutional republic, to not have a religious requirement, in opposition to what some of the colonies had done. So there had been some arguments about how this was all going to go. Some people, they're not done with that argument yet. Some people live right here in this area. The former leaders and some of the current leaders of Ottawa County, who you're going to hear about tonight, still want us to go back to a time that feels more like Pennsylvania in the late 1600s than the United States in 2024. So we like to remind people that it's as American as you can be to say to people, let's talk about what we're going to do with faith in America. How does faith fit in our conversation about the United States of America? So in our training around Christian nationalism, we're going to ask you to consider three things. Why is it attractive to people? What do they get out of it? What can organizations do, and what can individuals do? So the bulk of the conversation is going to be, what is this thing called Christian nationalism? How do people who hold to Christian nationalist views think of it? We're going to do everything we can to not put words in the mouths of Christian nationalists. Because Christian nationalists let the words fly out of their mouths all the time about what they think Christian nationalism is and how it plays out in the United States. Now, I will say this. I have a number of friends who are full-on Christian nationalists, but they don't call themselves a Christian nationalist. So that gets difficult, frankly. It can feel like name-calling to Christian nationalists when people start to say, well, you are one, and they say, I'm not one. And then you describe what a Christian nationalist, and they say, yes, that describes me, but I'm not a Christian nationalist. So it can be a bit of an argument sometimes. If you're in conversations with family or friend or church members or other church leaders or pastors or anything, and they're saying, I don't know what Christian nationalism is, that could be what's going on. So we want you to know that sometimes people hold to views that they don't put in the same category. Now, I'll tell you a group of people who do put in the category and why we formed this curriculum. We formed this curriculum the weeks following January 6, 2021, where we decided we had to travel the country. A bunch of people in this room have been pastors. And a lot of us as pastors thought Christian nationalism is real, but it's just kind of an irritant and not anything we really need to spend any time talking about. Just leave it alone and it'll be fine. It's like, when the inspector comes around and says, hey, on the front porch of your house there, you've got lead paint. You're like, well, what do I do about the lead paint? They're like, just don't scrape it off and it'll be fine. That whole conversation. Don't let kids pick at it. Maybe put a little latex over it and seal it in. But if you're going to start taking it off, you really got to take it off. That's how I thought about Christian nationalism. Like, just don't scrape it up and don't get it all airborne and everybody will be fine. Then this happened. And by this is a group of people inside the Senate dais in the afternoon of January 6, 2021. They beat police officers, broke into the Capitol, took it over, and prayed this prayer.
All the way back to the monument. All the way.
Jesus Christ, we spoke your name. Amen.
Amen.
Let's all say a prayer in our sacred space.
Thank you, Heavenly Father, for gracing us with this opportunity. Thank you. Thank you, Heavenly Father.
Amen.
For this opportunity to stand up for our God-given unalienable rights. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for giving the inspiration needed to be police officers to allow us in this building, to allow us to exercise our orders, to allow us to send a message to all the tyrants, the communists, and the globalists that this is our nation, not theirs. That we will not allow the American way, the United States of America to go down. Thank you, divine omnipresent creator God, for filling this chamber with your white light of love, your white light of harmony. Thank you for filling this chamber with patriots that love you and that love Christ. Thank you, divine omnipresent creator God, for blessing each and every one of us here and now. Thank you, divine creator God, for surrounding and blessing us with your divine omnipresent white light of love, protection, peace, and harmony. Thank you for allowing the United States of America to be reborn. Thank you for allowing us to get rid of the communists, the globalists, and the traitors within our government. We love you and we thank you. In Christ's holy name we pray.
When the guys who break into the Capitol, first ones in the building, pray in Jesus' name, thankful that they're there and for the work they're doing, I think it's fair to say the effort on January 6th was a Christian nationalist effort. Had they even not broken into the Capitol and prayed that prayer, the night before, the same people organized a thing called the Jericho marches around the Capitol. They bussed people in on January 5th, had a big rally with Michael Flynn and with Rudy Giuliani and Roger Stone and the whole MAGA crowd. And they did a whole march all around the Capitol invoking the story of Jericho where the walls come crumbling down. Then they launched their attack on the Capitol. And then have taken over school boards, have tried to take over county commissions, have tried to take over the Senate from elected positions. The guy reading the prayer there who wanted to make sure he took all three hats off so that his prayer would be legitimate, his name's Jason. He's running for Congress in Arizona with this as his calling card. He served time in jail and now is running as one of Donald Trump's heroes in the January 6th attack on the Capitol. So, that's a different kind of Christian nationalism than the kind that we saw in the 1950s that really wanted to organize to be sure that we put "In God We Trust" on the American currency. It wasn't there before. Or to add God language to the Pledge of Allegiance. Or the 1800s version of Christian nationalism wanted to be sure that monuments were raised up with the commandments on them from the Old Testament, this kind of thing. We've had many versions of Christian nationalism. I want to suggest to you there's a new variant, like there's a new variant of the COVID virus going around right now. It mutates. There's a new variant of Christian nationalism alive and well, and I think it's more contagious and more deadly. We're going to talk a little bit about that, and Nick in a little bit is going to give you a rundown of how that's playing out right here in these neighborhoods in West Michigan, and especially in Ottawa County. Well, there's a few things we want you to engage with tonight, and that is to have a sense, not of fear, not even a sense of dread, certainly not a sense of there's nothing we can do. We hope you'll leave here feeling a sense of empathy and engagement and curiosity. Because the best way forward is to know that your contribution can actually do something in the lives of people who believe Christian nationalist thoughts. So we think 3 questions can be very helpful. What do Christian nationalists believe? Why do they believe that? And what role does that belief play in their life? Now, I think this is just helpful for understanding people, frankly. Especially if you ever have a difference with someone, it's really good to know what they believe. It's very tempting with Christian nationalism, especially, to tell people what they believe if they're a Christian nationalist. But Christian nationalism is like a spectrum of beliefs. And people might hold some and not others. And some people who are very Christian nationalists might be into one idea, but not even into another. So it's really helpful to understand, what does someone actually believe themselves? And then to ask them why they believe it. Do they believe it for historical reasons? Do they believe it because of things they've been taught? Do they believe it because of things they've discovered themselves? Like, why do they come to these conclusions? The most important in my experience is to understand what role a belief plays in someone's life. What does it do for them? See, for all of us, the beliefs that we hold, they function in our lives. They do something. They perform some kind of action for us. And when we understand what a belief does for someone, it makes it easier for us to understand with empathy why they would hold it. For the most part, as wacky as we all are, we're not just nuts, right? We're all a little goofy, but we actually have reasons for why we think the way we do, even though it doesn't make any sense. And look, human beings seem to be the only conscious species that self-harms. So how we explain to ourselves why we do what we do, and why we believe what we believe, and why we act the way we do, all of us together, y'all, we're an enigma to ourselves. So pinning any one of us down too tightly, we should always be a little bit cautious about that. Now, here's something I think is pretty important. Christian nationalism is not about people exercising their faith in public. A lot of people who oppose, this is a big double negative. People who oppose people being against Christian nationalism think that those of us who are confronting or trying to resist Christian nationalism, they think what we mean is we don't want people to be public about their faith. That is not what Christian nationalism is, being public with your faith. And it's not what confronting or resisting Christian nationalism wants to prevent. In fact, I would say the best thing we can do is to encourage people to be more public about their faith. We travel around in a bus, for crying out loud, that says faith, hope, and love in it, a very common phrase from the Bible, and the greatest of these is love, like that kind of stuff. Like, be public about your faith. We stand on street corners and parks and church parking lots and say stuff out loud about our faith all the time, calling Christian voters to make the common good their voting criteria. We just run around the country doing that. I hope every person of every faith exemplifies their faith in public life. What Christian nationalism is the belief that the government should advocate for Christianity above all the other religions. That it should derive its authority as the government from Christian teaching. And that it should grant privilege to the Christian faith. That's a whole different thing than Christians being public about their faith. For a long time, until a redistricting, my representative was Ilhan Omar in Minneapolis. Ilhan Omar is a Muslim woman from Somalia. She practices her Muslim faith. I am glad she does. I'm proud she does. I'm proud to vote for her. But I don't want her taking her faith and trying to use the Quran as the basis for our civic law. But I want her to exercise her faith, and while I exercise my faith, and while at least 3 of my children exercise no faith. Right? So that's fine. But I don't want her using her religion as the basis for our common law. But I also don't want my new representative, who's of Jewish faith, to use his Jewish faith. Or the one who I think is going to be elected in this coming election, because my current representative is not running for re-election, who's a Christian. I don't want that person using their Christian faith. I don't want any of these people using their faith as the basis for our government. So how do we do this? Now, for a lot of people, They've just been so steeped in the idea that the very best of their Christianity and the very best of American ideals are so close that it's really hard to tell one from the other. But they are different, even if they have some things in common. All the faiths of the world have something in common with the very best of our laws. But it doesn't mean we derive our authority from them or grant privilege to them or do their bidding. This is a part of the difficulty of the conversation that we're going to have. I want you to think about it. So, what's the role of faith in our society? A deeply held American question for sure. I'd already talked about this idea of there being a variant. Okay, this new variant of Christianity, it's loaded with these kinds of ideas. That America is anointed by God to convert the world to Christianity by force if necessary, and they seek to accelerate Jesus' return to earth through their work. The modern version of Christian nationalism, which we'll describe to you in a moment, does not just want America to be a Christian nation. It wants America to be the leading nation in the conversion of the world and for all world leaders to convert their countries to Christianity and to Christian rule. The National Prayer Breakfast that goes on in Washington, D.C., presidents go to it and senators go to it and people pray, is set up and designed by a Christian nationalist group that recruits pastors and leaders around the country to bring their national leaders from around the world into that prayer meeting to be part of this effort so that there can be a global movement of Christianization in every nation. That's what that thing has been up to since the 1950s. It has jet fuel in its engines right now, partially because of what happened during COVID. The conspiracy theories of QAnon and COVID have blended together with Christian nationalism and Michael Flynn and those folks, and they're spewing out a whole new idea of what Christianity for the globe means. But it's a global movement, not just a movement in the United States. We'll show you a couple of illustrations of this, people saying this. The divine mission of God will be carried out when true believers seize control of the institutions of the U.S. government. That's what they're hopeful for. Now, again, these are quotes from those groups about what they're doing. Try not to put words in their mouth. We'll show you a couple of illustrations of some groups doing that right now. One of the bases for modern day Christian nationalism, and actually comes out of the founding of the Prayer Breakfast and others, is this idea of the 7 mountains of influence. The 7 mountains says this, that just as the metaphor is built on the idea of Moses going up on a mountain as a leader of God, Mount Sinai. They say there's not just one mountain in modern society, there are 7. Arts and entertainment, business, education, family, government, media, and religion. And the 7 mountains movement wants Christians to be in control of all those arenas of society. And when they are, then you could have the permeated Christian narrative across society and culture. By the way, the reason that so many Christian nationalists are into Donald Trump is because they think he is a unique leader crossing so many of these sectors. Now that he's a failure in those is a whole other conversation, but they don't see it that way. They see him as a unique character weaving them all together. All right, so let's show you a little illustration of this. Here's our friend Josh Hawley. We're going to be going down to Missouri, where Josh Hawley is the senator, and Josh Hawley's giving a speech at the Edmund Burke's Foundation on modern day conservatism, and he wants to say this about Christian nationalism.
Some will say now that I am calling America a Christian nation, and so I am. And some will say that I am advocating Christian nationalism, and so I do.
Sometimes it's just hard to get over the smugness, so sometimes you just have to close your eyes. Some people are going to say I'm advocating for Christian nationalism, and so I do. And then he goes on to explain why he thinks, based on Aristotle philosophy, about how Western civilization, in and of itself, all of Western civilization is Christian, and therefore all of Europe and everywhere else should also be converted over to Christianity, to its true foundations. Goes on with this nonsense as a senator. And then there's this group of cats. These people, one of these guys, a guy named Dutch Sheets, is a real advocate of the new modern seven mountains theory. Guy that went to Bible college with Tim Gilman right back there. So friends and family discount to Tim for being here and bringing these guys. They have this big seminar, or this big conference that they were running, and they lay out a prayer declaration that they call the Watchman Decree. If you've seen the movie God and Country, this is in there. If you haven't seen the film God and Country, it's produced by Rob Reiner, and it sort of details Christian nationalism. And this clip is in it, and I'm in it. So, you know. All right, so here it is. It's they're going to read it out loud, and then we'll talk about it just briefly after, and then you'll hear from Dan, and then you'll hear from Nick. So here we go.
All right, go ahead. All right, Dutch, lead us.
So we'll read it together, okay? As a patriot of faith, I attest my allegiance first and foremost to the kingdom of God and the Great Commission. Secondly, I agree to be a watchman over our nation concerning its people and their rights for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Whereas we, the church, are God's governing body on the earth. Whereas we have been given legal power from heaven and now exercise our authority. Whereas we are God's ambassadors and spokespeople over the earth. Whereas through the power of God, we are the world influencers. Whereas because of our covenant with God, we are equipped and delegated by Him to destroy every attempted advance of the enemy. We make our declarations. We decree that America's executive branch of government will honor God and defend the Constitution. We decree that our legislative branch, Congress, will write only laws that are righteous and constitutional. We decree that our judicial system will issue rulings that are biblical and constitutional. We declare that we stand against wokeness, the occult, and every evil attempt against our nation. We declare that we now take back our God-given freedoms according to our Constitution. We declare that we take back influence at the local level in our communities. We decree that we take back and permanently control positions of influence and leadership in each of the 7 mountains. We decree that the blood of Jesus covers and protects our nation. It protects and separates us from God. We declare that our nation is energy dependent. We declare that America is strong spiritually, financially, militarily, and technologically. We decree that evil carries no power, authority, or rights in our land or over our people. We decree that we will operate in unity, going beyond denominational lines in order to accomplish the purposes of God for our nation. And we decree that America shall be saved.
And at one point, I thought they were going to say, we decree that we will all floss on a regular basis. By the way, the oil independence, funded by the oil industry and oil donors, oil companies. So that's why they're concerned about energy independence. What they mean is fossil fuel burning. So these guys are serious about this. They organize for it, they put it into churches. 7 mountains. They want to permanently control all the positions. They want to have biblical laws. Look, I promise you, if Ilhan Omar stood up in Congress and said, I want to have Quranic laws, they would freak out. So, this is what's alive and well across the country. It's not just happening here in Ottawa County. You're going to get some clear description about what is happening here in Ottawa County and how it's going to go for you all and what's going on. Nick's going to walk us through the rest of the presentation. Dan here, now Nick, if you haven't met Nick, he'll talk about this. He's from right here in West Michigan. Dan's from right here in West Michigan. Dan was working in Indiana at a church, wrote a song about what he was seeing going on, and we always think it fits quite well right here. So this is Daniel Deitrich, and this song's called "The Hymn for the 81%."
I didn't know the word or the term Christian nationalism, but I remember the first time I thought something was off. I was a pastor, a worship pastor for about 15 years. And at the church where I grew up and then became a pastor, every 4th of July and Memorial Day weekend, we had this big 40-foot stained glass cross at the front of the sanctuary. And on those special holidays, we would raise this 40-foot American flag that would obscure the cross. And if the sun was shining just right, you could see the sunlight shining in the shape of the cross through the flag. And that symbolism just didn't sit well with me. And I didn't have the words for it at the time, but then 2016 came along. And I saw so many good people from my church and those larger-than-life figures that informed my faith put their weight behind a man that looked nothing like Jesus. And in the 8 years since, there's been no turning back. They've doubled down and tripled down every line in the sand that Donald Trump has crossed. Good, kind Christian people have said, yep, that's our guy. And so I put my frustrations into the song, and maybe you can find your story in it as well. I grew up in your churches, Sunday morning and evening service. I knelt in tears at the foot of the rugged cross. You taught me every life is sacred, feed the hungry and clothe the naked. I learned from you the highest law is love. And I believed you when you said that I should trust the words in red to guide my steps through a wicked world. I assumed you'd do the same, so imagine my dismay when I watched you lead the sheep straight to the wolves. You said to love the lost. Well, I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth. I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. Oh, they started putting kids in cages, ripping mothers from their babies, and I look to you to speak on their behalf. Oh, but all I heard was silence, or worse, you justified it. Sing glory, hallelujah, raise the flag. See your fear return to hatred, but you're baptized it with language torn from the pages of the good book. And you weaponize religion, and you wonder why I'm leaving to find Jesus on the wrong side of your walls. And you said to love the lost, well, I'm loving you now. You said You're better than this. Oh, you taught me better than this. Come home, come home. You're better than this. I used to think you were better than this. Come home, come home. Oh. Maybe I was too naive, or I just didn't want to see that there's always been a little poison in the well. A church is sit on stolen land, a nation built by stolen hands, and we use the Bible to justify it all. Yeah, from slavery and segregation to mass incarceration. This is who we are, but not who we have to be. There's a lot of work to do. Pull up the evil by the roots. But repentance has to come before there's peace. And you said to love the lost. I'm trying to love you now. You said to speak the truth. That's why I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? Be love, oh God, and justice roll down. Be love, oh God, and justice roll down. Be love, oh God, and justice roll down. May your love overcome and justice roll down. Thank you so much. And now it's my privilege to introduce you to Nick Brock. Nick Brock became a good friend of mine back in 2020. We rode around the country together in the bus. We stood up to Proud Boys together. We had some good times. We had some crazy times. But Nick is a real one, and I'm excited to introduce you to him if you don't already know him. The director of Vote Common Good West Michigan. So give him a hand.
Thank you, Dan. That's been my favorite song for a while. I first connected with Vote Common Good in late 2019. They were kicking off for 2020, and they were at Park Theater. I just did a little Google search, and Vote Common Good happened to come up on my feed, so I went out by myself because none of my friends wanted to come to such an event. They weren't sure what to expect. It was a packed place, but Dan, in that song, it just kind of blew my hair back, and ever since it does something to us. I know that Doug and a friend of ours, Rob, who's not here, there's a little joke, are you crying? Am I crying?
Yeah.
Like it always kind of pulls on the heartstrings. So yeah, my name's Nick Brock. I'm from Kent County, Granville area, and I have the local chapter, the only chapter of Vote Common Good called Vote Common Good West Michigan. Started that in 2020, but with this work here with Confronting Christian Nationalism, I really started to ask the question 3 years ago. So this was during the shutdowns of the pandemic, and if you're familiar with the Jenison area, there's a large Memorial Day parade that's happened for I don't know, a really long time. And it was supported by a local organization, just a nonprofit, the Ambucks. But they didn't want to participate in that because their demographic for volunteers is a little more elderly, so they wanted to stay home and be safe. So this group called Ottawa Impact raised their hand and said, hey, we want to get out there and do something. So they did, and they had the big parade. And so I went to the parade, and I was just blown away by number one, the amount of people who wanted to get out. People really wanted to get out. It was still really packed. But but really how Christian nationalism was on display there. There were political candidates at the time, Ryan Kelly, who ran for governor, who was at the U.S. Capitol and participating in that insurrection. He was going up the steps. He even had the FBI locally take him for questioning. There was another candidate running for governor who was very much in the conspiracy theories for COVID-19. And then I saw all these churches participate along in the parade with the floats. The American flags and the cross were there, and it was there that I really started to see it really come into fruition a little more here locally, and I started to pay attention to what Ottawa Impact is doing. So I say all that is because what I hope to do for the next 45 minutes, 60 minutes, no more than that, is lay out for you what Ottawa Impact has done since they went into office in 2023, rather 2022. So I'm going to take you back to January 10, to their second meeting, where a lot of public comment was given, and then I'm going to take you all the way to most recently to just after the August 6th primary, and show you examples of, number one, how they reject the separation of church and state, how they promote religious discrimination, how they promote a holy narrative, and how they show indifference to democratic backsliding. And just as a reminder here too, since the August primary, Ottawa Impact lost their board-led majority, so now there are only 4 seats available. Yeah, if anybody was a part of that and voting for really great candidates to oppose them, give yourselves a round of applause, because that was a huge effort. So quite simply, Ottawa Impact's Christian nationalism used the power of government to advocate for, derive their authority from, and grant privilege to Christianity, which is the definition Doug gave earlier, but also has led to support for or indifference to democratic backsliding. That is a bit of a take from David Gushie's book on Christian nationalism, Defending Against Our Christian Enemies. Great book there too. These actions are simply un-American, and the people of Ottawa County deserve better, which they've done. All right, so I want to take us into what we've called here, what Doug has kind of coined the last time we were in Ottawa County doing an event, the center of the swirl. So the center of the swirl, or the microcosm of Christian nationalism locally. The Washington Post has done a number of stories on Ottawa Impact, and it all kind of drills down to how that national effect is really happening here locally, and really specifically with what Ottawa Impact is doing. So what you see here, this is Pastor Bart Spencer from Freedom Lighthouse Baptist Church, a self-avowed Christian nationalist. He gave an interview to Fox News locally here. He said, yeah, that's my gig. I want the whole world to be Christians, and I want America first. That's what he wants. And part of that interview was like he wanted others to then define the terms. Well, what is Christian nationalism? Define your terms. So that was a little bit of a motivating effort for me. Well, okay, let's go about and do that then. So here's a video, and in this video, this is from January 10, where he essentially baptizes Ottawa Impact for what they did in the previous meeting, dismantling a whole bunch of things in place, controversial decisions. And then he says, this is just the way you, God, designed it, electing them, Ottawa Impact, to represent us, the people. Your power, God's power, to rest upon them. Can we?
Click the button.
All right, click. Okay. Again.
But then he comes over in verse 18 of Ephesians chapter 6. And as a result of that battle that y'all are facing, the ones that you're fighting right now, it's out all 11 of them. Knowing the burden that they have taken on willingly, the people just the way you designed it, elected them to represent us.
All right. So what was in there is and maybe I'll play it once more because I forgot to preface this, but he references Ephesians 6. Ephesians 6, where it says, and he says in that, just prior to that video, is that verse where it says, "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." So he's going straight from the book of Ephesians, from the New Testament, to the county commissioners, making that beeline for this is the spiritual wickedness that the book of Ephesians is talking about. When we're talking about the Democrats the Republicans who were in office previously, those were some of the spiritual wickedness, the tyranny in high places that they wanted to move out. So then he ends it with that the battle that you are fighting right now, is that spiritual wickedness. Okay, so this is from the same meeting. Now, a ton of people gave public comment at this meeting. Anybody here give public comment at that meeting or go to that meeting? There were just so many folks. Maybe you know somebody. So this is Jeff King. He is the chaplain for the Ottawa County GOP. And what he goes on to say is he talks about how all of the decisions made at that first meeting were essentially kind of an act of God. That it's where all of those things return Ottawa County back to God. Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County. So we're having this question in the community, starting right from January 10, where there's this baptism by a local pastor, who says he's a self-avowed Christian nationalist, a chaplain from the GOP saying, all of this, what's happening is being taken back by God, and Jesus is Lord of Ottawa County. So then, we get to Ottawa Impact. We get to Joe Moss and Sylvia Rhodey because they're starting to hear what's going on in the community as well. And they respond that the term Christian nationalism, or the critique of how they're using religion in the public space, is just public intimidation. It's just made up. It's fake news made up by progressives. Many Christians are not bothered by the term Christian nationalism. It's simply the latest sleight of terms and defamation of convenience to affect the outcome of an election. It's really laughable. But to many of us, it wasn't laughable. So, then we had an event here with this church, the Reverend Jared Kramer. I reached out to him and said, hey, what do you think we can do? Keith Menace as well. A bunch of local pastors got together, I think just across the street, right? And we said, hey, this is not how we want to see Christianity used here locally. What can we do to support any efforts to push back on those? So what came out of that was the unifying congregations. So out of that, the unifying congregations, which is a coalition of 12 local churches, they had 500 plus people sign on to this statement saying, hey, we oppose the policies of Ottawa Impact, and here's what we want to do. So one of the things that they did is they had us come back and give a Christian nationalism training event. So we did that down in Holland. We had like 300 people show out. And it was really one of those movements where here in Ottawa County, people were really taking note and figuring out, asking the question, like, what can we do? How do we respond? All right, so there was, I think just before the summer, some of you might remember there was a poll published by an MLive and a local polling group that went out to voters of Ottawa County and asked a series of questions. One of these questions was about the separation of church and state. So what they found out from these voters is that a majority, 63% of Ottawa County voters support separation of church and state, which I thought that's a lot of people. I didn't think it would be so high, but people really have some strong feelings about this. So they ask the question there in bold, should there be a separation between the church and state? While it is important for elected leaders to follow their faith, they should separate their personal religious beliefs from their actions as elected officials, so they can represent people of all different faiths. Now 31, almost 32% felt differently. They felt that more religion should be in government. But I was really quite pleased and felt hopeful about what is possible in Ottawa County when it came to this issue. So the separation of church and state, without that, the government can use its power to advocate for, derive its authority from, or grant privilege to a particular religion. Which is what we'll get to next, this expression of that from former Commissioner Lucy Ebel. Now, Ottawa Impact rejected separation of church and state, I believe through this specific example, and then there's a few other ways that local groups, Ottawa Impact and the Ottawa County GOP supported that. And I think we can get this video to play.
Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County.
Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County.
Again.
Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County.
One more time.
Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County.
Number 2. I speak life to Ottawa County.
I speak life to Ottawa County. I speak life to Ottawa County. I speak life to Ottawa County.
And there it is. And just as Doug mentioned earlier, can you imagine if somebody from a different faith went up there and said, Buddha over Ottawa County, Muhammad over Ottawa County? There would be a big uproar over that. But this is the preferred or default religion of the area, so it's okay, right? It's okay, it passed by. There was hardly a stink made of this. I was quite surprised, but that's just how it happened. So then,
What was that meeting?
so good question. So that was Lucy Ebel
Right.
in front of the
Jesus is
Fillmore
Lord over
building.
Ottawa County.
So the Fillmore building is the building where they hold their meetings. She was right out front. She held a press conference to address why she was being recalled during that cycle. But she made it clear, I'll take that back a little bit. She made that statement first. So that's where she was in her role on government property. So she went on to further say after that came out, pick a side and boldly defend it. Ask the Lord what he would have you do. If God is for us, the OI vetted Republicans, who can be against us? And this was through the Ottawa County GOP, the Republican Party there. They put that out in support. So we have the local infrastructure saying, yes, that is totally fine. It's totally good. You can do that. And what we have here is then statements from Joe Moss and then from the Ottawa Impact website saying, we believe Lucy Ebel stands firm on her convictions. America needs leaders like Lucy. And I'll interpret that as America needs leaders that will push for and advocate for and privilege Christianity in their role as government officials. So I would cite those examples right there as Ottawa Impact using the power of government through an elected official to advocate for and privilege Christianity as a county-wide religion for over 300,000 plus people. This is unconstitutional and leads to democratic backsliding, which I'll get to at the end. But next, we're going to talk a little bit about religious discrimination. And you might be familiar with this. So part of that religious discrimination comes from Vice Chairperson Sylvia Rhodey. Now, she recently did an interview leading into the August 6th primary, just kind of asking about what are your values? What does it mean when it says on Ottawa Impact's website, Judeo-Christian heritage? What does that mean? So she went to go on and say that it's being a little bit more of a traditional historical American. Traditional historical American. Now, I would suggest that that has strong nativism tones in there, suggesting that American civic belonging is more genuinely reflected in real Americans. Sylvia Rhodey has a different idea. Ottawa Impact has a different idea of who the real Americans are, these traditional and historical Americans. And that has historically been in that narrative, in that rhetoric, native-born, white, heterosexual families, and who profess, I would say, a more fundamental or conservative form of Christianity. I believe we have that video.
To me, really, American values kind of is, Tucker Carlson puts it this way, I'm really a 1980s moderate. It's not radical, it's just not swinging to the extremes that our culture wants to go at this point in time. So maybe it's being a little bit more of a traditional, historical American.
And if you know anything about Tucker Carlson, and I think you do, I think you would agree with that statement that means more of your white, heterosexual, conservative Christians, and not going too far from that circle. All right, so next we'll move to
me, really,
what's happening here with the local pastor, with Jared, and this has been going on for a while. The religious discrimination lawsuit. Now previously the local pastors could just sign on the sheet to give an invocation, and they could just do it. However, when it came to Jared, there happened to be some problems. There was a delay and a delay and a delay. So Jared's like, well, what's going on? So he seemed to think, and then his attorney, Sarah Riley Howard, seemed to think that this discrimination is because of the flag that flies outside of this church and the promotion of a Grand Haven Pride Festival. This is clearly a more progressive space within some of these churches here locally. Ottawa Impact has a problem with that, in particular the LGBTQ plus side of that. So the lawsuit said that Joe Moss and the board, I think it is particular to Joe Moss, endorses a particular set of religious beliefs and excludes a particular set of religious beliefs. There's an alternative Christian voice in Ottawa County that's currently and actively being suppressed by the board. Now this lawsuit is ongoing, and right here it says the only way that this issue was really brought to light, and Jared eventually was invited to give an invocation, but it was only initiated by the county after initiating that litigation. So it's still ongoing, even though he had given the invocation. But the question of that, endorsing a particular set of beliefs, went against that policy that they had. And we'll get into that next. All right, so there was, I think I'll go ahead one, yes. So when Jared gave his prayer, the invocation, Commissioner Roger Belknap had that sign on his desk, thewaronchildren.com. Now what that means is it's a website for a movie trailer that says the LGBTQ plus community is heavily involved in grooming children and encouraging sex trafficking with children. Wow. So it floats in that space. And that's what he was wanting to protest, because he believes Jared, through what's happening here with the Pride Festival and the flag and Jared's stance on these particular issues, he thinks that's a problem. So this was his one-man protest, his way to show his discrimination against a newly adopted board policy that said, we're not going to discriminate against anybody. Commissioner Belknap voted, yeah, I like this policy. But then he in turn did that. Yes, yeah, and so what she said is that only helps Jared's lawsuit, which rightly so it does, because his attorney, Sarah Riley Howard, was like, yeah, we're going to put this in here to show how that is continued discrimination, even though Ottawa Impact and the board has said, no, there's no discrimination here. But clearly, and even Belknap said himself to the M Live, like, yes, I did this in protest.
Is that this church right here?
Yes. Yeah, yep.
Jared's yells back.
Sorry.
So just one small piece here, I don't have any slides on this too, but then there was the Satanic Temple of West Michigan. They gave their invocation, and there were a lot of people there protesting there, which is their right to do, right? The Reverend Louis Cypher, he's a co-head minister for Satanic Temple of West Michigan here. He gave his invocation. It went off kind of without a hitch. But in my opinion, a protest was still initiated by now gone Commissioner Rebecca Curran, because what she did after he gave his invocation at the dais, at the podium, she, sitting on the dais, walked down from her seat, went to the podium, and then gave another invocation and said, "In the name of Jesus Christ." So, I mean, that's one way of kind of finding that loophole, but I would add another example as a commissioner in her role, finding a loophole to still discriminate. Like saying, no, you can't have the invocation. I'm going to come after you and give the real invocation. So religious discrimination. Ottawa Impact, using government power to advocate for and privilege the religion of Christianity, which has led to democratic backsliding through religious discrimination. All right, this moves us into our holy war narrative. So we're going to talk about this holy war narrative, and then there'll be a final piece about this democratic backsliding. So this here is Matthew Trehella. He wrote this book called The Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates. It is, I'm getting ahead of myself, the Ottawa Impact had an event where they had him talk about his book. The subtitle is that is a resistance to civil disobedience, or resistance to tyranny. So Ottawa Impact had an event with him, and then the Ottawa County GOP had an event with him. And what he stands for, and I think I hope to make that clear here in a second. So a couple excerpts from the book. Let me get the title right first. It's The Doctrine of the Lesser Magistrates, a proper resistance to tyranny and a repudiation of unlimited obedience to civil government. Now, just summarily, throughout the book, Trehella describes how Christians can leverage the Bible to resist acts of perceived immorality when government acts in rebellion to God. Now, justifications for these actions of resistance to include violence rely heavily upon a worldview that a lesser magistrate, this lesser magistrate meaning somebody, whether they're in authority, like a county commissioner, if we imagine it like this, a county commissioner, maybe a state representative, and then a governor of these elected position, of these magistrates, this is, the county commissioner is a lesser magistrate, and even somebody who is not, or somebody who rather is a private citizen, they can become a lesser magistrate and interpose, meaning they're going to step up and step in between against the tyranny that they see happening. And the tyranny that was happening was the COVID-19 and the shutdowns with the mask mandates that the Ottawa County Commissioners previously helped to enforce. Enforced by who? A Democratic governor, and the whole executive being Democratic. So that is the tyranny that they want to refute. So they bring in Matthew Trehella, and Trehella essentially gives them a path to how to do that. So the book as a whole gives permission for Christians to use government power in an effort to advocate for this. 2 excerpts from the book. First one, the authority an individual possesses in government is delegated authority. Their authority is not autonomous or unconditional. Their authority is God-given, and thus they have a duty to govern in accordance with His rule. Our loyalty is to Christ first, not the man, not the state. So when the civil government makes unjust or immoral laws or policy, we obey Christ. And I'm going to the end here. Christians are the best citizens. The only thing that's problematic about this, right, is, well, who gets to define those terms? Who's interpreting the Bible? What church gets to define the God-given authority and how that's acted out locally here and even nationally? So that becomes a problem when your God, however He's defined, and whatever theologian you're working through, is used in local government. All right, this is the final thing on Trehella. So just to show you the through line here, at this event, Trehella was invited to speak, obviously, but he made it clear why he was supporting Ottawa Impact and what that meant in terms of this whole lesser magistrate doing something, interposing. So I'll read it first so you can catch it at the end. Their very first acts, Ottawa Impact, were to remove the health director Nazi and replace her with a sane person. And when they tried to put in their, get rid of Adeline Hambley, and then that didn't work out. They also completely abolished and eliminated the Office of DEI, which is nothing more than a pipeline for racism and homo sex. But here he makes really clear how he supports their movement.
In January of 2023, less than 4 months ago, a new county commissioners board was seated in Ottawa County after candidates ran against tyrants and won. They ran not only because they had seen a federal government that has long been impugning and violating and redefining the United States Constitution, which is the founding document of this nation, but they also ran because they saw their governor was a psychopath and the local county commissioners were blithely doing her bidding. And when they took office, they immediately interposed. Their very first acts were to remove the health director Nazi and replace him with a sane person. And they also completely abolished and eliminated the Office of DEI, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, which is nothing more than a pipeline for racism and homo sex. They ended all that perversion upon the citizens of Ottawa County, and they saved the taxpayers over $260,000. Ottawa County has fired a shot and made it be heard across America. And this is why I'm honored to be here tonight.
So that's it. That's why he was honored to be there, because they were leading the struggle against that. So there's a video where Joe Moss and Sylvia Rhodey are, promoting the book, and they talk about what they've done, but essentially that whole narrative leads to, we're taking back our county. So, in my opinion, that author Trehella and his book helps to provide that pathway through scripture. There's a lot of scripture in the book that he uses. He uses historical references as well. I will say that he makes a pretty strong argument, but it's a fringe argument that's trying to go mainstream. Oh, right there. All right, Ottawa impacts. Promotion of Christian nationalism leads to government powers in advocating for, deriving its authority from, and granting privilege to Christianity, and a form of Christianity through the doctrine of the lesser magistrates. All right, last piece here. Democratic backsliding. So Ottawa County voters value political freedom. And I picked up on this when the Ottawa County GOP said to the other Republican candidates running against them, no, you can't do this. We condemn you, stop it, do not run for office. Well, those candidates from the conservative Ottawa PAC said, who are you to tell us as American citizens that we can't run for office? We will run for office, and that's what they did. So that's, they held a press conference for that, and they spoke out about that. But that was what I saw, and I think they saw too, as voter intimidation, demanding that those 12 Americans not participate in the democratic process. So they said, we reject the Ottawa County GOP Executive Committee's decisions. And in the bold here, we will not stand by and watch the Ottawa GOP and Ottawa Impact dictate how voters should think or vote. Now, what was really happening there is that, and you may have heard it too, I would say what was happening there is that the Republican Party, locally, and probably nationally too, says, hey, if you're a Democrat or if you're more of a progressive voter, stay out of our primary. This is our primary. That's what the chair said. This is ours. So even though in the state of Michigan, you don't have to register to vote or register within a political party, you can vote how you like. The only thing that you can't do when you get that ticket is split your ticket. You can't vote for a Democrat and a Republican. So what they're trying to do, and what I purport here, is that through this sowing the seeds of voter suppression, because people don't know how this happens. Some voters might be voting for the first time or second time, but they don't know how the primary election works. So if Ottawa Impact and the GOP can sow that seed in confusion, I believe that's a form of voter suppression and misinformation. And these candidates wouldn't stand for it either. All right, last slide here. So I hope all of that helps you when you think back through what has happened, what Christian nationalism looks like here locally. You can point to all these examples. Like the argument too that we set forth is we don't have to make a straw man argument. We don't have to conjure this up out of thin air. They're out there doing it. We just need to inform people what it looks like. So Ottawa Impact used Christian nationalism for the power of government to advocate for, derive their authority from, and grant privilege to Christianity, which has led to support for indifference to democratic backsliding. These actions are simply un-American because Ottawa Impact thinks that they are the Americans. And the people of Ottawa County deserve better, which, as we all know, has happened. However, there's 4 more remaining. So my encouragement to you on this front is to be informed about what they're doing and to continue to be watchful at these meetings. There's Joe Moss is still there, Sylvia Rhodey, they are kind of the headliners for Ottawa Impact, Allison Miedema, and Kendra Wenzel. So there's 4 more. So I would encourage you to just be watchful and take note of what they're doing as they move forward in the next 4 years, because if they win, they have their seats for the next 4 years. So that is my presentation. Now, Joel.
Let's do a couple of questions.
Questions?
Yeah, folks, you have thoughts, comments, questions? How's this kind of landed on you? Yeah. What do you think?
Well, thank you all. It's a lot of work and organization for putting this together. Could you just very briefly for me, it's maybe a little off the topic, but tell me more about who you are and what you do. You tour around the country during this? Or?
Yeah, this is a great question. Yeah, our group's called Vote Common Good. The chapter here in West Michigan, Nick gives leadership to, but we travel around and work all over the country. And we have a major focus is trying to help. Thank you. Is trying to help. Told you to hold on to it, then took it from me. We try to help faith voters, especially Christian faith voters, who want to separate their political identity from their religious identity, so they can feel this ability to make more choice. A lot of people don't really feel like they chose both a political and religious identity. It just kind of came as a package, maybe in their family or because of their religion. But then they start to change in how they want to think about their politics, and they don't quite know how to do it. It's really hard for a lot of us to make pattern changes anywhere in our lives, but especially in our relationship to our politics. Christian nationalism is this really important topic that for a lot of people is helping them rethink that relationship between their religious identity and their political identity. There's some other issues we work on as well that are really important to people about immigration and democracy itself, insurrections and that kind of thing. So these are major issues that people are struggling with. So sometimes our work is presentations like this on what is Christian nationalism, or what's going on with immigration, or what's faith and democracy and how do we make sense of that. But then we also hold candidate rallies like we did yesterday in Holland and like we'll do tomorrow in Grand Rapids, where we'll stand with candidates and introduce them to voters who might want to think about voting for them. So we do them outside of our buses, or we do them sometimes in churches or parking lots or parks or those kinds of places. We run those sorts of events.
So with both Republicans and Democrats?
We try to invite Republicans, but none will sign the pledge that we have about being a common good candidate. So it's a self-selecting process, and there really aren't. Other than here in Ottawa County, when there was a primary inside the Republican primary, there were some of those candidates.
Yeah, so when the primary was happening, I'll take it back to before Ottawa Impact came into office. All the incumbent Republicans, Roger Bergman, Phil Kyers, and the like, they committed to the common good through West Michigan. They said, hey, that sounds great. We had a couple events with them. They participated with us, but then that is once they made it open that they were kind of with us or talking with us. The local party said, no, you're censured. And they got a lot of pushback, called rhinos, the whole gamut. So that makes it difficult for Republicans who want to commit to the common good. Put that out because when we get to some voters, they see that and say, no way, no way. But Phil Kyers currently, he's a common good candidate, and then just recently in this primary, the mayor of Hudsonville, Mark Northrup, was like, yeah, sign me on. Those are good things. Yeah. So we've had a number of Republicans. It's just really difficult for them to go public.
Yeah, it's a really tough one.
What kind of traction are you getting nationally?
Well, I'll tell you, in the state of Michigan, in the election in 2020, only 2 counties in all of Michigan flipped from voting for Trump in 2016 to voting for Biden in 2020. Ottawa County and Kent County. More votes switched in those 2 counties than the margin of victory in that presidential election in Michigan. These counties were the counties that won Michigan in that presidential election. And you don't get a flip in these counties without religious voters changing their religious vote. There's just too many of them, right? Too many self-identified Christians. I think somebody yesterday, maybe it was you, referred to this area as the Silicon Valley of evangelicalism and the rest. There's just so many. So it's great. There's great impact of that kind of work here. And one of our particular outcomes is we want to see Donald Trump never hold the presidency again as an organization. We're committed to that work. And the only way that's going to happen is if people who used to vote for Republicans don't vote for Republicans in this presidential election at the top of the ticket. What they do elsewhere won't have an impact on that, of course. So we're working hard to make sure that faith voters know that they have a choice when it comes to that election and how they're going to You know, sometimes we spend a lot of time reminding people what a problem Donald Trump is, but we like to think he's a self-cleaning oven, does all the work for you. You just let him talk, and people kind of got it. If he's not bad enough, nothing we say is going to convince somebody. But we're not trying to change anybody's minds. We're trying to work with voters whose minds have already changed, and they don't know what the behavior is going to be in light of that change of mind. That's the work that we're particularly doing. And there's 4 things that get us around the country, by the way. Faith, hope, love, and diesel. So if you like to put a little diesel in the truck, you can see Tim over at the place. That's our joke of fundraising at all these events every time, and that setup was perfect for us, so thanks for asking that. Yeah?
No, that's what you.
Oh, okay. So you will be glad that organizations like you and people working locally have had an impact. No, when Ottawa Impact first got into office, Roger Bergman was having office hours and met with community members at the library here, and a lot of us were saying, I mean, hey, you have to come out and you have to speak out against what's happening in the Republican Party. You have to support, and if we're going to make this change, you have to support Democratic candidates that are, you know, for good governance. And at that meeting, just over 2 years ago, Roger said, I could never vote for a Democrat.
Yeah.
But in the last week, he and the 3 or 4 other members of, former members or to-be members, hopefully, of the Ottawa County Commission have come out supporting the Democratic candidate for state rep just south of us, running against Bradley Slaw, who is a former treasurer of Ottawa County. And, you know, I mean, I voted for Brad before.
Wow.
but they're, you know, these 4 Republicans have said they're supporting the Democratic candidate because Bradley Slaw is
That's wonderful.
part of the Ottawa Impact. So these things are,
Yes.
it takes time and persistence and
Yeah, thank you. That's a great story, and so true not only for people in political positions of power and influence like those folks, but for average ordinary people. We talk to them all the time. We meet people always who are saying to us, I never thought I would vote for a Democrat. And now they're about to do something they thought they would never do. And here's the reality of that. People have a worldview in which they thought they were the hero, always doing the right thing. And they thought that the Democrats were the villains. They're now in a situation where they're about to act in a way that their previous self would have seen siding with the villain. And they need to explain to themselves how their old behavior was heroic and their new behavior is heroic and is the opposite behavior. That is a really different, this is what in psychological terms and in behavioral change terms, they call a cognitive shift. How do you get yourself to do the very thing that's the opposite of what used to be your commitment as a new commitment in order to fulfill your previous commitment? How do you do that? And that's not easy. And it's very easy to notice how the political parties make that switch impossible for people. Our political situation makes it very hard for someone to make that shift. I've talked to a lot of Democrats who will say to people like that, what took you so long? Not understanding how hard that shift is. So it's a very difficult thing for someone to do.
And I think in this recent happening that, you know, the fact that county commission or former county commissioners were censored by the Republican Party and that they felt like they were pushed out of the family that they had been a part of. I mean, and that their family, I mean, this is a long line. It's their grandparents, their great-grandparents, that party that they were part of. And then all of a sudden, it's kind of like, you know, they're like, well, they're coming after us.
Yes.
And it had been a wake-up call for some, but it's happening.
It is happening. And I'll tell you, I mean, look, the Christian nationalist people point to Ottawa County as a success story, just so you all know, nationally. And the people who are working to resist Christian nationalism are pointing to Ottawa County now as a success story. Right? So it is the center of a thing that is going on. And there's about 5 or 7 other counties in the United States. There's one in Southern California, this is happening in San Diego. So there's places where this is happening around the world, or around the country. And there's great competition because the things being learned are going to be incorporated on both sides to make whatever future is going to look like, take those learnings and make those the normative process. So frankly, you're right in the middle of something that is, you know, I promise you, I can assure you, mostly boring to everybody else in the world. As someone who does this as, you know, for their work, they're like, so what do you do? And then people are like, oh my gosh, that's nerdy as can be. But it is super important, and it's going to carry a great level of importance and impact. And we're going to face it at the national level. And look, it's not going away. Josh Hawley is pegged by all the power systems to be the one to take over the Republican Party and to be the standard bearer. He is the chosen son for that line. So they are positioning, that's why he's out with this Christian nationalism thing. They are positioning a full-on national Christian nationalist takeover in the Republican Party, and that's why Josh Hawley gave that speech.
So I do have another question, but I'll wait in case somebody else wants to ask.
Yeah, anybody else? The floor is yours.
So you're looking at the political aspect of Christian nationalism. Are there any groups that are looking at well, the kingdom aspect of it? That, to me, one of the things that is most upsetting is that, you know, I feel like the Christian faith has been hijacked. It has been taken away and used to represent. I mean, how can you use a book based on love to advocate violence and how often do you read in the Bible, fear not, and then but fear is used to drive people. So are there groups that are looking at and saying, no, we want to take back our faith. We want people to feel safe in Christianity. We want them to know that they're loved, that we're loving people, and who's doing that?
Yeah, there are many groups doing that, yes. There's all sorts that want to talk about the impact of Christian nationalism on the church. We do that work. Joel's going to sing a song about that in a minute. We do some of that. To be blunt, and part of the reason we do the work the way we do it is because so many of those places and organizations don't want to talk about the political implication of it. And Christian nationalism fundamentally is a political movement, not a religious movement. Every expert of it recognizes Christian nationalism is a conservative movement globally that uses Christianity for its political purposes.
Give us our Bible back.
And when people want to talk about only the impact on the Christian church for something that's being used for political gain, it gets really difficult. And it's one of our, just to be blunt, constant frustrations in our world when we reach out to churches and talk to them and say, can we have conversations about this? They'll say, yes, you can talk about Christian nationalism, but you can't talk about the political aspect of it. And on the right, there is no barrier to this at all.
Right.
There is no difference. We like to say that in the progressive left, we like to build a 900-foot bridge to go over a 1,000-foot canyon. And we expect people to jump the last bit, where conservatives build a 2,000-foot bridge that goes right into a dolly land and straight through the voting booth. So they are pumping people right through a whole system in which it's absolutely consistent of a biblical worldview, a way they understand Christianity and discipleship, leads straight into politics and straight into social outcomes. And when that gap is in there and churches continue to say, we won't talk about politics and you can't talk about candidates and all the stuff, which there's no reason you can't, they continue to create this space that so many Christians say, these people on the right have an explanation in which my religion and my politics hold together all the way through.
Right.
And then the rest of it's built in this little gaps, and it's super hard and frankly super frustrating. So there's a bunch of groups out there that'll talk about the impact of that and about the Bible and the impact on the church and all that. But the Christian nationalists, that's not the only thing they're worried about, because as you see in all this stuff, they're not just talking about what you're doing in Sunday school. We could show you clips of Michael Flynn talking about taking over 200 school boards. This is what Moms for Liberty is doing, taking over school boards and libraries and going after librarians. It's a political movement, and the churches that stand against Christian nationalism and won't talk about politics are silent to the detriment of the very outcome that they want to see.
Isn't it ironic that...
Don't you think?
that this group, or these people who are part of this movement, actually believe they're defending the First Amendment.
Sure.
And they're violating it at the very same time
Yes.
by everything that they're saying.
Yes. They are the constitutionalists defending the right to freedom of religion while they shut down the freedom of religion.
Yeah.
It is.
It's crazy.
And it's so American at the same time, right? People who study this stuff it is a wash, rinse, repeat narrative with a different set of clothes in the washing machine each time. And it's just been going on, and it is so well refined. And frankly, progressives, and especially progressive churches, as a progressive pastor, I will speak very bluntly about this, choosing to not talk about all of these issues as an issue of faith formation and discipleship is really a problem. We have, look, to live out a Christian faith in a culture is what churches help people to do. Part of our culture is our civic culture, and part of our civic culture is our government. And when progressives don't talk about these issues as a way to understand faith and political life, and they let people figure it out on their own, it just lets other people run the table. Look, none of us like to feel dumb, but most people don't even know what the Establishment Clause is. And when you say just that phrase, they're just like, oh my gosh, such a super nerd. Like, is this AP government class here? And there is nothing called the separation of church and state, right? It's a notion that we hold to as sort of a, love your neighbor and like that kind of thing. And it's kind of a idea we hold to, but that's not the phraseology that's used, but that's the one we tend to use. So freedom of religion, and there is no separation of church. It's so complicated to your average person about what's even supposed to happen that most liberal-leaning people say stuff like, and we hear it all the time. I promise you can watch our stuff and see it. Anytime we have a news thing, or I was on MSNBC Morning Joe 2 weeks ago, and talking about the work that we do. And the barrage of religious people should have no place to put their religion into the public sphere. They should keep it private, that's it. The thing that the Christian nationalist people say the Democrats are wanting to do to shut them down, people are actually calling for that all the time. They really are. No one in power, but just your average person, like, I just hate those religious people. They should just be quiet, and it should have nothing to do with public life. That thing is all over. You could just go onto the YouTube video, just of my little thing on Morning Joe, and read 100 versions of that. Hundreds of times, people saying that stuff. It's like, okay, that's what we're up against, right? Is that, like, on the one hand, you got these people denying the constitutionality of the Constitution by the thing they're doing is they defend the Constitution. Then a bunch of people saying religious people shouldn't even be elected to office, and then other people saying only religious people should be elected to office. And that is the swirl in America, and that's the swirl in Ottawa County, and that's what we're living in the midst of. So it's just a lovely, big old, beautiful mess out there. Yes.
So I have a question about. So my impression is that the Ottawa County change that we just managed to start, moving in the opposite direction was really because these Christian nationalists came in and did not have a good idea about what the county commission did, what their powers were, how they, conform to the Open Meetings Act, how they handled a workforce, You know, there were just so many different stupid things that they did. And I think that we managed, you know, as people organized to change voters' minds and get other people voted in, it was mainly that we just had to get these idiots who had completely blown through the surplus in our county by stupid things that brought on lawsuits. So my question is, are they going to get smarter?
Yes.
And do we have to worry about the next time they're going to actually have done some study about what is in their power and what their strategy can be?
Yeah, and maybe not fire like the health inspector. Yeah, that kind of stuff, right, yes. No, that is 100% what will happen. They're gonna learn, they realize that Joe Moss doesn't know how to run a board or a county or anything, and he had no business doing what he was doing, and it was a terrible job and all the rest. But when Christian nationalists are good at it, which, to be true, they have been good at it, and people don't even notice that they're pushing Christian nationalism stuff. I mean, there's so much Christian nationalism running in our counties around America, but you normally don't notice it because they're not both so blatantly Christian nationalists like these folks, and simultaneously so incompetent at the core work. Yeah, that is my great fear, and I'm sure it's the great fear of a lot of other people that work in these areas.
I would add to that too, as they get smarter, they'll go to other places and do the work at a lower level. So for example, in the previous election cycle, Ottawa Impact, they endorsed not only like their candidates, but a bunch of school board candidates. So I live in Granville, and 2 precincts, it's like right on the county between Ottawa and Kent, 2 precincts for the public schools cross into Ottawa County. So then, in the last election cycle too, 2 of their endorsed candidates got into office, and now those 2 candidates are endorsing 2 new candidates for the Granville School Board. So what I would say about that is, and so they're pushing that same rhetoric, but it's, I mean, we're talking about the city of Granville, but it's almost just like, well, it's just Ottawa County. So the level of awareness isn't there, but it's still in the water. So, but I don't know how much they're pushing that right now, but I would suggest to you, like, that's, there's that trickle down places where they can still work and then get smarter along the way.
John had his hand up first.
Now, you were approaching it a little bit. I've got some friends and neighbors who are Republicans, and they're probably going to vote for Trump. And they're very nice people. I'm blown away at their kindness.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that they see themselves as part of a Christian nationalist movement and wanting to take over the government. If I were to ever have the chance to say, well, do you believe the Christian religion should be dominant over it? No, I don't think they should be. But they're into, they don't know that they're a part of it.
Yeah.
And I have no idea how to talk to them. I don't know where to start. I don't know. We're sometimes afraid to bring it up because we go, oh, we'll lose another friend. I don't even know how to approach this subject.
Can I tell you a story that might be an indicator for a way for this? A month or so ago, we were in Pennsylvania doing one of those candidate events I described for a person running for the state house in Pennsylvania. We talked to the campaign about a location. When we were talking with the campaign about a location, they had suggested a parking lot of a restaurant that was closed, that had gone out of business. So we said, that's a great idea. They said it was a great idea. We thought they were calling the restaurant to get permission to meet there. They thought we were calling the restaurant. Neither of us called the restaurant to get permission. It was a Sunday. We pull into the parking lot of the restaurant. It's empty. And we set up the bus, chairs, flags. The candidate shows up. There's 50, 60 people that are there. A pickup truck drives in. Guy gets out, comes walking toward me. And I said, hey, good to have you. And he goes, what the hell are you doing here? And I said, oh, we're having this rally for this candidate. And he goes, this is my property. What is this? He looks at the bus, he sees the things, and he says, I'm a Trump-supporting, Christian, gun-carrying, truck-driving, conservative Republican. Get out of here. Pack your stuff up and go. And I said, I am so sorry. I thought we had permission. We'll start packing up now. And he said, well, like, is that candidate here? And I said, yeah, she's right over there. I said, can I meet her? I said, sure. So he walks over, he meets her, comes over and he says, okay, I can see you're all set up, so you guys can have your meeting here. I start asking myself internally, like, would I have allowed that? If a bunch of red hats had pulled up, put up Trump signs, and we're pushing for a local candidate to win on my property? He goes off to do some chores around, he's mowing his lawn, we do our event, it's a great event, we pack up, I walk up to him out in the field where he's mowing with 2 beers in my hand and $100 and said, here's $100 rental for the property, I hope that's sufficient. He said, yes, thank you. I said, I have 2 beers, you can have both of them, or if you'd be willing to, we could have one together. He said, I would like that, why don't we do it over by your bus? So he drives his little tractor over and he and I sit outside, right outside of our bus. And he starts talking about why he's moving out of Pennsylvania. Because Pennsylvania is too liberal now. So he's moving to Alabama. He said, everything I own is in that cargo container, big railroad cargo container, and we're leaving in the morning. I said, well, it's a great little restaurant, how long have you had it? And he talked about having the restaurant, how much he loved it. And I said, my wife and I have talked about owning a place like this, maybe with like a yoga studio and a performance space. And he's like, hey, you should buy my place. You should buy this. And then we start talking about church. And he said, you know, I'm all for Trump and I don't want any of you guys to win. But I'm just heartbroken about how our churches have turned into these places where we can't all get along on faith stuff and we're divided by this. And all of a sudden I started realizing I'm sitting there with a modern day Good Samaritan from the Good Samaritan story. The Samaritan who the Jews are supposed to hate and they're supposed to hate him. And he's the one that puts the man on this donkey and cares for him and pays for him. And like, this guy let us have his place, wants me to buy his place, to do my stuff in it, and is cheering us on and has the same grievous feeling about where churches have gone that you were talking about. And he's on exactly the opposite political side. I just think sometimes if we get over that fear and just say, hey, I think we're probably both heartbroken. And our differing beliefs about this function in our lives maybe in the same way. Like the thing that my belief did for me was helped me hold to my faith and care about America. And his belief, different than mine, functions the same way in his life. And once we realize that our differing beliefs have the same function, that's where we found a connection. That we were both part of this thing together. So I would encourage you, take one of those I support democracy for all, faith, hope, and love yard signs, put it in your yard, put it next to another candidate's sign, and start a conversation with your neighbor who says, I hold all them. I'll tell you one more story about these signs that we have. Some of the versions, this one here, over there says, I support democracy for all. We have some that say, I will vote faith, not fear, hope, not hate, love, not lies, version of these signs. We were doing a candidate event in Pennsylvania, and it was a Catholic candidate who was running. So there were a bunch of anti-abortion Catholics who really kept trolling this candidate when he was running. So they came and set up all their stuff at our events. They're yelling. I worked out a deal with them. I'm like, you can stand over there, but when people are speaking, just be respectful and don't yell. And they could barely do it. Just the same thing happened with the Proud Boys. They could just barely contain themselves to not interrupt people. But they kind of did okay. So after the thing was over, I was standing around talking to somebody, and I said to one of the people, I said, look, we might disagree on abortion, but if you say you're pro-life, then you probably want to reduce gun violence. You probably want to stop executions by the state. You probably want to be sure that hunger is not something that's dominating the lives of somebody. She said, no, it doesn't mean any of that stuff to me. We had these Black Lives Matter signs with us. She said, that's not what it means to be pro-life. And she said, in fact, if you or any of your Black Lives Matter loving friends came into my house without my permission, I'd shoot you with my gun myself. And then she points at the sign and she said, but can I have one of those signs for my yard? And I said, no, those are $25 donations. She goes, She goes to her car, gets $25, comes over and gives us $25 and takes a yard sign. Because in her world, she's the one full of faith and we're the ones pitching fear. She's the one full of hope. We're the ones pushing hate. She's the one full of love. We're the one pitching lies. And I said, you can put a vote common good sign in your yard, sure. Hope people look up vote common good. But that's the thing that to realize, oh, they've just inverted the whole thing, but it was also a connection point.
Yeah.
So I think there's a way, and the fear you have is real. 2 days ago, we were in Hudson, Wisconsin, and a woman took one of those signs, and her husband with her said, he said to me, he said, we live in Florida. And they looked at her and she said, you're not gonna put that in our yard, are you? And she said, yes, I am. And he goes, whoa, you're being pretty brave today. She said, yes, I am. It's time to be brave, right? And he was like, we're gonna lose friends and all the rest of it. You might not want to have that argument all the time. And I'll tell you, we have lifelong friends that live next to us. We adopted our children through the foster care system. They were their foster care workers, or foster care family for 2 years. We adopted those boys. They moved into our family. So our next door neighbors shared, like our driveways next to each other. After Trump got elected, we didn't speak until they moved about a year ago. So that's also real, right? We just couldn't get over it. The one time we spoke was I called for a Lyft ride to go to the airport. I didn't know my neighbor was a Lyft driver. She picked me up. We had to talk on the way to the airport. It was so awkward. It was so awkward. But we just talked about like how our kids are kind of doing right now. The kids that we raised and they were older in 15 or 20 years. So that's also real. I just think we have to get ourselves as much as we can over that thing, because those neighbors, you just never know how far along the journey you described earlier they find themselves on. And we don't know, if you know your Bible stories, we don't know what Damascus Road people are traveling on, and we don't know where the moment strikes where they're like, oh, maybe I've been doing the thing that's opposite of the thing I thought I was doing. There's a reason why the Bible has a bunch of narratives like that. They're like these great human narratives just about brothers killing brother and hating each other and change and all, because that's what human beings live through and go through all the time. So I don't know what you do with particular neighbors, but I just think look, the tendency can be easy to tell other people we disagree with to be quiet, and there's days I just do, and I just want Donald Trump to shut his yapper. But I think we're probably better off not telling anybody else to be quiet, but telling one another to speak up. And I think if we say a few more things, there might be a few more things people are interested in hearing. Well, hey, thanks, y'all. Thanks for being with us. Joel's going to take us out with a little song, a little serenade. Are you still up for that, Joel?
Yeah.
We promised to get you out of here by 8. If Joel sings fast, we'll make that happen. Thanks being a part of this. And we have some little love offerings over here for you if you want a little love on your back or on your yard or in your mailbox. I will say we have these postcards that are one of our new favorite things, and the postcards are a call for you to send out to faith voters in this area. We have a list of 15 registered Republicans who we know are faith voters, and the postcard asks them to vote for love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, self-control, and Harris Walls in this election. And when you write that as another faith person and put the address on there and put it in the mailbox, you just know that you've done something in your effort to reach one in some way that you can. So if you want to take home a set of those or a yard sign or a hat or the rest of it, you can see Tim over at the table. And this is Joel.
Hi guys. Thanks for this great discussion. I think I can speak to one of these questions, especially yours. Is it Jim?
Yeah.
John. I get into these discussions with people a lot. I just did, Tim and I, a woman out here, and I didn't handle it super well. Didn't handle it bad, but I'm learning to engage, and it's hard. It's really, really hard. I had a guy in Hudson the other day just come at me, big older guy, and I'm like, after he walked away, I thought, it does not surprise me why that man is voting for Donald Trump, because that's how he comes into the world, and he sees that just braggadocious thing reflected. I can only speak for myself. Joe Biden was the first Democrat I ever voted for president. I think I voted maybe for a congressperson or two before that, but in 2020, I voted for Joe Biden. I did not vote for Trump in 2016. And 2016 was when I started shifting. I was a born and bred Republican, and the reason I was a Republican is because I'm pro-life. That's like, period. I was always just taught, like, we stand up for human life. We don't kill babies. And so I think what it was for me is people appealed to my intelligence. And in 2016, I was 28 years old or something, watching the Republican primaries, trying to decide which Republican I was going to vote for. And I realized that I had never once, I voted for Ted Cruz in the Senate. I was in Texas in 2012. And because somebody told me he was a principled conservative, because they told me he was a born-again Christian, and I'd never seen the man, I'd never been to his website. In the primaries, I saw Ted Cruz for the first time, and I said, who is this man that I voted into the Senate? And I watched these, whatever it was, 12 or 15 candidates. And out of those 15, I think there were 3 that I, as a Republican voter, did not hear tell what I knew to be a lie. Straight to the face of the cameras. And because I decided to just do my research, I watched the Democratic primaries as well. And 30 years of conditioning that Hillary Clinton is the devil. I couldn't bring myself to vote for Hillary, to my chagrin. But I found myself watching the primaries and realizing I identify with a lot of the stuff Bernie Sanders said. And I started just going down the list and going, the only reason I'm a Republican is because of abortion. That's it. And so it just came up, and I said, is Bernie just a great guy that also likes to butcher babies in the back? Like, that cannot be. And it just, my intelligence, my cognitive dissonance was up against itself. And I became liberal because I'm pro-life. That's why. I began to do the research on the abortion topic. And that's what I feel like, don't get into arguments. Just, first of all, appeal to people's intelligence. Say, hey, don't watch the clips. Go watch a speech by Donald Trump. Go watch a speech by Kamala Harris. And you just be a normal human being, right? And here are the actual statistics about abortion, because it really is about abortion for a lot of people, especially voters of faith. And I began to realize that the abortion issue is very gray, and that being anti-abortion does not mean you're pro-life. So that's just my story, is wherever you can find that on-road, and just appeal to their compassion, their pro-life, because that's a strong ethos. So I probably took all my time I was supposed to do for the song. I wrote the song a couple years ago, and it basically says exactly what we've been talking about. I don't want the faith of my fathers that bombs and segregates and slaves, that uses scripture as a weapon. If you're a woman, immigrant, or gay, I don't want the faith of my mothers, silent while men hang from a tree. I see in Christ a clear reflection, a love beyond our wildest dreams. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. Sing that with me. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. I want the faith of Moses, the kind that sets the captive free. I want the faith of Naomi, lifting the ones who are weak. I want the faith of Mary, holding the mystery deep inside. But most of all, I want the faith of Jesus and His grace, turning darkness into light. Down through the ages we've seen it,
violence, to war and steal and take and take. But when I read of the God of love, who rescues even enemies, there's something in me that rises up. Come be that hope in me. I want the faith of Joseph, forgiving those who do me wrong. I want the faith of Hannah, turning my grieving into song. I want the faith of Deborah, leading a nation out of shame. But most of all, I want to run to see your kingdom come, rolling the stone of death away. So do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. I want the faith of Esther, confronting hate, not backing down. I want the faith of Tamar, courage to speak the truth to power. I want the faith of Hagar, naming the God who sees and hears. But most of all, I want to be like the one who died for me, the love that's casting out all fear. Yes, I want the faith of Martin, naming the dream as though it was. I may not get there with you, no, but I know that we shall overcome. I want the faith of Malcolm and Mamie, demands we face and see the truth. But most of all, I want to be like Jesus was for me, the hope that's making all things new. But most of all, I want to be like the one who died for me.